Tom was engaged in the process of collating and grouping information for analysis, which constituted the core of the work he and his team had conducted on the test car over the past month. Despite his reservations, he was compelled to undertake this task. His attention was abruptly diverted by a text notification on his mobile device. He observed the screen display a message but did not take note of the sender's name. Several minutes elapsed before he noticed a lull in the data and looked up from the monitor displayed a notification, prompting him to check his phone. He observed a number that was not registered in his contacts. Despite the local area code, he was unable to recognize the number. Initially, he considered deleting it as spam. However, he decided to open it to ascertain if it was from someone on the team whose phone number he had not yet saved. Upon clicking on the text, a message appeared on the screen. Initially, he was confused by the content. The message indicated that the sender might have sent him a sexual image, but on his phone there was a photo that was more explicit than he had anticipated. He read the message and noted that it was from Bradley's, a local pub. He then read it again, thought for a moment, and then chuckled slightly. It was not often that they got the wrong number for sex. He was about to delete the message when he looked at the picture again and his heart stopped. He had not noticed it at first because it was on her left leg, so small that it was invisible. The diminutive mole belonged to Alice, his spouse of 6 years. He gazed at her once more, incredulous, seeking evidence that would disprove what he had observed with his own eyes. As he scrutinized her more closely, however, he became increasingly convinced that he was looking at a highly incriminating photograph of his wife. He read the note once more. Bradley's was a local pub, but not the one where Alice had been. He was in the neighboring town, but why was Bradley's at 6 o'clock? It was 6 p.m. when Alice was en route to Boston. Her team was preparing a significant proposal, scheduled for presentation on Monday afternoon. The entire team had flown in that day and was scheduled to meet the following day to finalize the proposal and on Sunday to conduct a comprehensive rehearsal before the actual event. As a key leader, Alice was present to oversee the preparation. It was 5:15 p.m. Her scheduled arrival time in Boston was 4. Typically, she would contact him upon landing, but it was reasonable to assume that she was occupied with assembling the team and their equipment and en route to the hotel. He contemplated contacting her but ultimately decided to respond to the message first. While not an original course of action, it was a predictable one. "Who is this? Where did you obtain this photograph? Should I meet you at Bradley's?" He began to pack his belongings for the day. He resolved to visit Bradley's to obtain a resolution, one way or another. He drafted a message to Alice. He inquired as to the status of the flight. He would have something to eat and requested that she contact him when she was free. He resolved to maintain a low profile and attempt to ascertain the situation's details. As he proceeded to his vehicle, his phone emitted a notification. He accessed the message, which was a response from the enigmatic caller. "I'll be there, but I'm confident you'll find someone more intriguing than me now," it read. His mind was reeling. He accessed the maps on his phone and promptly made his way to his vehicle. The estimated time of arrival was 30 minutes. The journey to Bradley's would take approximately 1 minute by car. The cost was $40. He would arrive shortly after 6 p.m. He was unaware of the critical nature of the time, so he would proceed directly to the destination and hope to arrive in time for the individual or individuals of interest as determined by the message writer. His phone rang again. This time, it was Alice, expressing concern about the team's schedule. "I'll call you later," she said. Before retiring for the evening, he sent a message expressing his affection and promising to contact her again later. He was more preoccupied with the prospect of meeting at Bradley's and the source of the message's intimate details about his wife. His heartbeat accelerated significantly when he exited his vehicle and entered the parking lot at 6. The time was 12 p.m. The author of the message had not provided any indication of who he was seeking, leading him to conclude that the individual who wished to meet him at this location was already acquainted with him and would contact him directly. However, the remark about the presence of a more intriguing individual caused him the greatest concern. The author of the message appeared to possess knowledge that he was not privy to, and he felt as though he was being manipulated. Nevertheless, he was unable to discern any other means of resolving the matter. He was deeply troubled by the photograph, and he placed unwavering trust in her. Their sexual relationship was highly satisfying. He was under the impression that there was only one way for someone to obtain his wife's photograph. He was aware that he would soon discover the answer to this question. The prospect of the finality of this answer caused him to experience a sense of fear. He proceeded to enter the establishment and surveyed the interior. He was unfamiliar with the layout of the pub. He momentarily stepped away from the entrance and observed his surroundings. He observed a large dining room, and to the left of it was a bar. He proceeded to the bar, located a seat at the end of the bar, and sat down. The bartender had just finished filling an order. A man dressed in formal attire approached Tom to take his order. He requested a draft beer and turned to observe the dining area. His attention was drawn to a man who had just taken his order and was walking across the dining room floor towards a table occupied by a group of people who were visibly pleased with their company. Then he saw what the poster had been hinting at. Alice was sitting at the table, accepting a drink from the man, dressed in a black dress and pearls, was smiling and appeared to be on autopilot. He stood and walked over to the table where Alice was sitting. He was 2 steps away from her when she saw him, and her expression changed from an open smile to a frightened look. He did not slow down as Tom approached the table. He grabbed the man's hair was yanked back sharply with his left hand, causing the well-dressed man to drop his drinks and stumble backwards, losing his balance and crying out in pain. As the man pulled the man past him, his left hand was released, and a right punch was prepared to the face. However, the man's backward movement was too fast, and the punch was out of range. Before Tom could engage him, the man took 1 step towards him and was recognized. "Don't get up, Pete," said Tom. "I'm serious." The previously Pete, attired in a suit that was soaked through with drink, lifted his gaze from the heap of clothes at Tom's feet and nodded, though he did not move or speak. Tom then looked back at Alice, and the entire table fell silent. He recognized several individuals, all of whom were members of Alice's team and had come to his house to dine and socialize. He considered whether loyalty to the team might outweigh infidelity, and he wondered if the truth would be revealed to him by someone who was present at that moment and who knew it. He did, however, briefly consider identifying the individual in question, ultimately deciding that it was not a pursuit worth undertaking. He informed her that he was leaving, emphasizing that she should do the same if she wanted any chance of salvaging their marriage. She nodded and began to rise, but he raised his hand, requesting that she allow him a minute to leave before doing so. He then turned to depart. As he did so, he looked at Betty Wilson, who was sitting next to Bob Thornton. He noted that Betty Bill was also in Boston, and inquired as to whether this was what Hannah thought. The couple lowered their eyes, unable to meet his gaze or answer. His question pertains to the veracity of the assertion that the entire team is engaging in sexual intercourse with one another. He was forced to acknowledge that at least one of them was indeed involved. He was so preoccupied with this realization that he failed to notice that he had arrived at his own driveway. He entered the house, procured a beer from the refrigerator, and sat down in the living room. He was aware of Bill Wilson and Hannah Thornton, but he was unable to identify the other 2 couples in attendance. There were 4 couples in total. He was undecided as to whether he should contact Bob or Hannah. He realized that he was disinclined to engage in conversation and was not particularly well informed on the matter. However, he was aware that Betty and Bob were providing misleading information and attempting to assess the situation. He decided to send them a written communication. He promptly drafted a note to both of them, informing them of the recent developments. He suggested that they contact him for further updates. Now that they were aware of the changes in the travel plans, they could decide whether to investigate the matter further. At least he could reassure himself that he had acted in accordance with his conscience. 20 minutes passed when he heard the garage door open. The door opened, and Alice drove into the garage. He was waiting in the living room. She walked in, still wearing her little black dress but without her shoes or jewelry. She seemed calm as she walked into the living room and sat down opposite him on the sofa. He was silent and waited for her to begin. He knew that silence is a powerful tool in any discussion. He decided that the silence would last as long as necessary. It didn't take long. Alice seemed ready to explode. The situation was not what you are mistaken in your assumption. He raised his hand to silence her. You are wholly unaware of my thoughts on the matter. This evening, I observed the following. Tom replied, I don't require a detailed account of events. As engineers, we are both aware that there is no definitive answer to the question of why. There is simply a rationale employed to mitigate poor results. Consequently, I will not inquire about the reasons behind this. Let us begin with a more straightforward matter. How much time, and how often, do our colleagues know about this, other than the other traders at the... Am I known as your cockled among your work colleagues and our friends? No, Tom replied. It's not like that at all. We are a team, Alice said. Our travel plans were disrupted, and instead of returning home and hitting the road again tomorrow, Pete suggested we just stay in town and rest before the start. I didn't see the whole team there. Where was everyone else? When we received the message, some of the team decided to stay home one more night and meet us at the airport tomorrow. He acknowledged that she had chosen to be untruthful with him. He inquired as to whether there were any developments between the project engineer and the program manager that she wished to divulge. Well, to begin with, Pete is unharmed. Furthermore, he persuaded the proprietors of Bradley's not to pursue legal action against him, she replied. His eyes widened in astonishment at her dedication. I am not concerned about your romantic partner. Had that individual not misstepped, I would have. The jury is still out on whether he broke his nose. Tom advised him to press charges, and he noted that he had already spent a night in jail, which did not intimidate him. He agreed that this would be convincing evidence. He responded with a half-smile when asked if he loved him. Alice fell silent for a moment, and he could tell she was gathering her thoughts. He acknowledged that silence was indeed a powerful tool and that his mind was working overtime to fill the space left by her silence. In his estimation, the situation did not bode well for him. It is inaccurate to describe me as his boyfriend. I am not in a relationship with him. There were no significant developments. I should have informed you about my travel plans, but it seemed inconsequential. Whether I was in the city or in Boston, it was irrelevant. You were not expecting me, and I was still committed to the team. We simply ate dinner before heading to our rooms. There was no reason for you to act in the manner you did. He merely brought drinks. You completely embarrassed me in front of my team. She was attempting to ascertain whether she could feign ignorance and disdain. He opened his phone, called up a message, and slid the phone towards her, across the coffee table. From the expression on her face, he knew that she remembered the photo and the circumstances. He realized that it was impossible to deny it. She began again, this time without further ado. He picked up his phone from the table, launched the voice recording app, and put the phone in his shirt pocket. Tom, our team, she searched for a word. Very close. She proceeded to elucidate that the group in question was comprised of a select few individuals who met on a regular basis. Bradley, she noted, was the primary contact for the group, and it was Bradley who bore the brunt of the responsibility for preparing the proposal. She then inquired as to the origin of the proposal, and it was revealed that it had been in preparation for a considerable length of time. The timeline of events was unclear, but it was established that it had commenced following Pete's assumption of the role of Prime Minister. We collaborated closely and I was drawn to him. Alice responded, he was unwise. Sexual intercourse does not simply occur, one must first remove their clothing. There are numerous conscious decisions that we are both aware of, and I request that you do not insult me. Approximately 6 months later, he responded to one of his questions. When Pete signed the contract, Alice nodded in agreement. He began again, addressing the group as a whole. He let the thought go without giving it a name. Alice then asked whether he had indeed convinced them to form a sex team within the company. She wanted to know what he had said to gain their trust. It is not merely impolite, there is more to it than that. I feel a strong connection to Pete and my team, perhaps more than ever before. Alice's bravado is becoming evident once again. He has a foreboding that this will not end well. Unfortunately, you will be able to see some personnel changes in your team. Tom inquired, what did you do? Alice gasped. Tom, if you tell. If anyone else were to be involved, it would have an even greater negative impact on the lives of those involved. It is therefore important to allow individuals to make their own decisions. Alice, you should be aware that I am unable to remain silent on this matter. I have a positive opinion of Bob and Hannah. In fact, I have a more favorable impression of them than I do of Betty and Bill. I have written to them to inform them of a change in my travel plans. The response of the spouses in question is contingent upon their own individual circumstances. I am at peace with my decision. Tom, we have the most productive team in the history of CR Incorporated. She spoke with great enthusiasm, and you have benefited as well, Mr. Smith. The fact that we held team planning meetings on Wednesdays does not negate your involvement. I never terminated our communication. You were always able to reach me when needed, and I was enjoying my work with the team earlier. Do you recall the photograph you showed me? Would you like to discuss it now? She was mocking him, so your current knowledge and apparent hurt ego are irrelevant. Alice expressed her displeasure, becoming increasingly agitated. I experienced a surge of arousal. Tom's heart rate accelerated as Alice continued to defend her team's driving force. He also grew angrier for a moment during the ride home from Bradley. He contemplated whether he could forgive her if this were a one-time occurrence with Pete. He forgave her this thought, which had long since ceased to be a source of concern. He was not interested in hearing any further details and was not inclined to do so, but she persisted. He was not going to allow her to get away with it. He should contact Bob and Hannah to inform them of his conversation with her and let them know that he had heard from her. He also informed her that they were currently stuck in Atlanta but that they had booked flights. For the morning, this is the narrative that Betty and Bill intend to advance, and you are expected to offer them your support. She demanded, there are tens of millions at stake in this transaction, and your objections are inconsequential. Send a message, and then we will discuss our subsequent actions. What next? Tom inquired. Moreover, are you intending to depart immediately, taking your ailing team and their leader, Pete, with you? If so, you are at liberty to do so. However, I shall be seeking legal counsel this week and shall endeavor to resolve the matter. The division is simple, 50-50ths. You shall retain your pension, I shall retain mine. Tom said, leave. You have reservations in the city, you may utilize them. Go to Boston and secure another remarkable victory for yourself. Furthermore, Tom, please disseminate these messages to your team. Alice implored, her voice now a mere whisper. In the event of Betty or Bill's departure before the presentation, the company could potentially lose millions. Individually, we could lose tens, perhaps even hundreds of thousands in commissions and bonuses. It is crucial to consider the potential gains that could be realized with this investment. It is a matter that concerns us both. Regarding this misunderstanding, please, Tom, do not allow unfounded fears about casual sex to impede your judgment. Pete has informed me that I am on the fast track to CEO status. I simply need to continue performing my current duties for a few more years. Is this not what you want for me and for yourself? Alice inquired. The force of the blow to the back and the wind knocked all the strength out of him. As he continued to lie on the floor with a knee in his back, Alice said, too much, and thus the jury is still out on whether my nose was broken. Pete said, leaning down and placing his face next to mine as I lay pinned to the floor, I'm not sure. Alice, I believe there must be a transmitter. Now I know whose team she is fighting for. Let us see whose nose will be broken. Pete grinned and took his phone, typing the following texts. We don't have time for this. Someone picked him up from the floor. There is only one person he deliberately pretended to be offended. The individual behind him was compelled to exert a considerable amount of force to assist him in rising to his feet. This afforded him the opportunity to ascertain some crucial information. His opponent was revealed to be a relatively ineffectual individual, struggling to support Tom's weight. Once Tom had recovered his breath, having been subjected to a series of blows, he resumed his participation in the proceedings. In contrast, Pete and his team Tom's team, comprised of seasoned sales professionals, operated in the field alongside the 160th Special Forces Detachment, based out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Despite the considerable expertise of their engineering counterparts, the team was invited to participate in arduous training exercises under the guidance of seasoned military personnel who had flown combat missions in aircraft. Modified by his team, these devices were designed specifically for their use. If these individuals arrived at your residence, it meant that they had been dispatched and that your time on Earth had come to an end. Tom and his team developed the necessary devices to gain access to high-risk areas and, more crucially, to exit them safely. Tom's team was proud that their modifications contributed to the mission's success and ensured the safe return of all personnel. The personnel from Wonder 60 and their formidable passengers expressed profound gratitude for the assiduous efforts of Tom's team in developing the requisite equipment and ensuring its functionality. Among them, Staff Sergeant Troy Baker stood out as a particularly intimidating figure. He was widely acknowledged as a paragon of conduct and respect within his domain, from the lowest to the highest ranks. He was renowned for never leaving anyone behind, a reputation that was solidified forever during the mission to Colombia. Staff Sergeant Baker instructed the young lieutenant, the platoon leader, to remain close by. It was the lieutenant's inaugural mission, and Staff Sergeant Baker believed he was performing commendably for a novice. However, upon encountering an ambush by FARC rebels, the lieutenant and his team were forced to fight back. He attempted to fight them off, but then he looked back and saw the lieutenant lying on the ground, bleeding from a head wound. The lieutenant lost consciousness. The medic checked his vital signs and reported that he was unresponsive. Baker knelt down and picked him up in the fire carrier. The medic stated that the lieutenant was deceased. Baker responded, "Perhaps he will still come home with us." The medic regarded him with a look of disbelief. There were still more than 5 TR to the landing site through a dense forest. They would be fortunate to return with their lives, yet they were burdened with the corpse of a fallen comrade. What was this soldier thinking? The senior sergeant read his thoughts. "I would do the same for you, Billy." He instructed the medic to remain close in case he needed assistance. When they returned to base, the doctor upon the helicopter's landing, the medic informed the doctor that the lieutenant had requested his assistance. The doctor acknowledged this with a nod and proceeded to retrieve a flashlight with a pen from his pocket. The medic observed with surprise as the pupils of the deceased lieutenant constricted under the intense beam of the flashlight. "Do you wish to reconsider your diagnosis, doctor?" the medic inquired. The revived lieutenant was promptly transported to the operating room. He was a paragon of longevity, speaking only when necessary but commanding the attention of all who heard him. He was a stark contrast to the prevailing ethos of his era, which espoused simplicity and disposability. His work was the antithesis of mass-produced, lacking the hallmarks of cheapness. It was meticulously crafted and unique. Tom and his team seemed to have a special interest in it, as evidenced by their prolonged engagement with it during the extended periods of downtime between missions. The staff sergeant expressed his gratitude by imparting basic yet effective hand-to-hand combat techniques to Tom and the team. He informed the engineers that it would be prudent to familiarize themselves with a few basic hand defense techniques, as there were a few potential dangers. The most common threats were a jam copier or a paper cut, but if they continued in this line of work, they would likely visit some interesting locations. Therefore, it would be beneficial to be prepared for any eventuality. "You'll have something useful to fall back on," Staff Sergeant Baker explained to the group. "However, it is hoped that a paper cut will not be the worst thing you will ever have to face." Tom allowed his breathing to become more controlled and leaned back onto his captor, allowing him to believe that he had Tom in his power. He recalled with greater clarity the various fighting techniques that the senior sergeant had demonstrated. It is possible that one may find oneself in a situation where one is unable to do more than absorb the blows. This is an unfortunate but inevitable reality. However, it is crucial to remember that even when one is hit, one can still fight back. To do so, one must simply. Tom recalled the lesson he had learned and, in turn, leaned back against his captor, passively resisting and draining the lone man's strength. "Give me the phone," Tom Pete said, looking him straight in the eyes. "If you comply with our requests, you may be permitted to remain with Alice when the team is not utilizing her services. It is important to remember that you can purchase a variety of toys with her bonus. Additionally, Alice may even purchase you a rubber woman for occasions when she is otherwise occupied." Tom remained silent, enduring Pete's relentless humiliation. He compelled him to perform his bidding. "Where is it, Tom?" he inquired, noting the outline of a phone in his shirt pocket. "Ah, here it is," he replied, reaching for it with his right hand. Tom stepped back with his right heel, catching his captor's shin about halfway up and dragging it down until he slammed into his Gucci. He flexed his arms and broke the grip of his captor, who cried out in pain and fell under his leg, which could no longer support his weight. He observed a widening of Pete's eyes in recognition. His right hand moved forward, and he turned his shoulder as the sergeant had demonstrated, delivering a forceful blow to the center of Pete's face with his clenched fist. He struck Pete's face with maximum force, causing a fracture. Pete's nose was bleeding profusely, and he collapsed to the floor. He turned to see who was holding him and saw Bill, who was crying and holding his leg. "I believe you have broken my leg." Tom placed his foot firmly on the injured area, causing Bill to cry out in pain. This action served to confirm Tom's suspicions. He then turned to face Pete, who was lying on the floor, raising his hands to his face and attempting to rise to his knees. Tom approached Pete and lowered his face next to his ear. "Your nose is broken, old Pete. I am not yet prepared to take one on the team." He then struck him forcefully on the temple. Pete sank back down, his adrenaline surging and his breathing quickening as he searched the living room for Alice. At that moment, he felt a strong blow to the middle of his back. He dropped to one knee at the base of his neck and turned to face another attack. He looked up and saw Alice with a cast iron frying pan in her hand. She missed the target and dealt Tom only a glancing blow. He rose to his feet and grabbed the frying pan. "Tom, we can still make it work," she said. "Think about it. The financial resources you will expend will be in vain. I will cease all further sexual activity. I will halt it entirely. You and I will resume our previous arrangement. We will be as we were in the past." Tom regarded her, his expression a study in astonishment at the rapidity with which she was transforming from one Alice to another. For a moment, he contemplated the alien. From John Carpenter's The Thing, how it altered its form in response to each new challenge. He smiled at the thought. Alice interpreted this smile as silent consent to her final request and moved to embrace Tom. He lowered his left hand from his neck to provide support, then, after a moment's hesitation, he raised his right hand. He then proceeded to strike her in the nasal region with a degree of force that would not result in unconsciousness but would, nevertheless, cause a fracture. Alice emitted a scream and collapsed to the floor. "Does it hurt?" he inquired. "Yes," she replied, "it hurts. Your eyes are watering, you cannot see, you cannot breathe, there is blood everywhere. This occurs with each instance." "Why did you strike me?" "Because I could," he replied. His phone was still on and recording. While not all of the records were in his favor, he felt he had sufficient evidence to justify his answers. He quickly looked around the room and recalled the advice he had received from the staff sergeant: decide when you can act and don't move until it's right. Once the action is initiated, it must be continued until there is no further movement except from the protagonist. He surveyed the scene, noting the presence of Bill in a corner and Alice attempting to staunch the flow of blood from her nose. He was the sole remaining active figure. He reflected that it seemed unlikely that either Loverboy or Mr. Bill would be able to on Monday. He was compelled to serve, which resulted in the unfortunate consequence of missing out on the substantial financial rewards. Tom continued, "I am curious to know how Art will respond when he learns that he initially considered calling 911 but ultimately decided to wait, aware that once the police arrived, he would lose the opportunity to question Alice." He proceeded to approach her, where he observed that a dish towel had been pressed against her face. Tom then demonstrated how to pinch the bridge of the nose with the thumb and index finger. The surge of adrenaline gradually subsided, leaving him with a sudden loss of energy. He sat down heavily opposite Alice. At this point, Tom's attention was drawn to his wife, who was not the same woman he had seen every day. He was perplexed by the transformation and questioned whether it was worth it. He observed that Alice, whom he had seen every day, was not the same woman who sat opposite him. He again questioned how she had deceived him for so long. He wondered whether it had been worth it. He asked Alice, who looked at him and shook her head. She replied, "If you would just agree, we were so close after Monday. I'd be on my way to the executive suite. This will set me back. I can fix everything, but it will set me back." "This is all you dreamed of becoming, Vice President?" Tom inquired. "What about us? Deception, lies, will this continue?" "Tom, you are so naive. Pete knew this. He told me that your black and white ethics and he informed me that the attitudes espoused by the Boy Scouts would impede my progress if I allowed them to do so. He advised me that I needed to break away from your control and become my own woman if I wanted to succeed. Did he tell you this before or after he obtained your body?" She replied, "You don't know half of it. Do all the things you said would improve my career." Tom was silent. When someone decides to blow themselves up, sometimes, one must simply allow events to unfold. He was still recording. "I will inform my loving husband of the ineffectiveness of the aforementioned strategies. I was compelled to ensure the timely and cost-effective completion of all my assignments. In return, I received only a few perfunctory commendations. It was only after Betty took me aside that I learned what a woman really needs to do to be successful. I can attest that sexual activity on one's way to the top is effective and considerably more straightforward than one might imagine. This occurred prior to Peter's arrival. Tom inquired, "For a capable engineer, you can be rather slow at times." She responded that she had first engaged in artistic pursuits at a Christmas celebration a year after joining CR and had never looked back. She then inquired whether he was also engaging in sexual relations with the boss. Art Van Delay. Tom inquired incredulously, "Yes, Tom. Art, Pete, Bill, and everyone else on the team who can help me in my career here, even now, if you think you've thought of everything." We told Art where we were going when we headed here. Now, he is assembling the rest of the team. They will be given a legend about our absence. They will have to make the move without us, but I think the extra effort we put in with their purchasing managers will pay off. Do I really want to hear this? He thought, "Oh, what the hell, why not extra effort?" "I don't even want to call it an effort," she said, laughing. "What's the old joke? Like the worst sex of my life was great." She continued, "At the bidders conference, it was so easy with the men that we had to get a little more creative with Brenda, the exemplary woman on the selection committee. It's funny that I am even capable of seducing a woman, but I had to enlist the assistance of old Pete as a catalyst. If we consider the promises that after the contract is concluded, we will begin working together, then it is evident that our selection committee is functioning optimally. Therefore, I am perplexed by the current situation. If everything is unclear, why are there so many aggressive tactics being employed?" Methods. Tom inquired as to the source of the idea. I informed him that it was Pete's concept. I advised him to relax and return home in a calm state of mind, allowing me to depart in a timely manner for my flight. However, he was determined to assume the role of the dominant figure. Observe the outcome. I am no longer the public face of the victorious team. Instead, I find myself in this situation with you, as I previously stated. It can be fixed, but it will set me back. "You wouldn't buy me so cheap," he said. "Maybe not," Alice replied. "But I would still fly well now," he said. "You definitely won't fly. Police are now involved, and it is evident that several felonies have been committed. However, the full extent of fraud has yet to be uncovered." "This is a federal contract, is it not, Alice?" Tom inquired rhetorically. "Indeed, the federal government does not typically prioritize such exhaustive investigations. Nevertheless, you have retained highly competent legal counsel, and I am confident that they will provide an excellent defense. Perhaps there is an alternative course of action." He left it alone for a moment, and Alice's cell phone began to ring. "Certainly, I'll put it on speakerphone volume," Art said. "The board of directors will address the situation in a decisive manner. I am relieved to see that you and the board are taking assault and fraud so seriously. These are all very serious accusations. Lawyers will benefit financially, but no one wants to rock the boat. We can pay the fine. Pete and Bill will perform community service. Ultimately, however, the couple will divorce and become half as poor." Art explained the situation in a matter-of-fact manner. "Do I hear "oh" in this tale?" Tom asked. "Alice always said you were the smarter of the two of you," Tom replied. "However, I'm more glad I hired Alice." "Yes, Tom," Art continued. "There is definitely an "or" here. We can't afford to keep you on," Tom said. "The affections of your wife, and when you discovered this, you were treated in a most unscrupulous manner. It was disgraceful and shocking." Tom picked up the phone instead of calling the police, as you suggested. "We could have come to an agreement. I just sent a picture to Alice's phone. It was not me who sent it, but someone else. The technicians informed me that they would cease to exist after viewing the image. Perhaps this will restore some goodwill." Alice opened the photo and turned the phone towards Tom. He observed the inscription, "Bank of Grand Cayman," and a number with a very large number. "When will this be introduced?" Tom inquired. "It is already there. Tom, you have an email with your account number. It was a very unfortunate day for you, Tom. You may be experiencing difficulty in making a decision, and I am not discounting emotions. Alice is a very capable woman, but nevertheless, emotions cannot be taken to the bank." "You cannot rely on emotions alone," Tom agreed, adopting Art's manner of speech. the dissolution of the marriage will be financially advantageous to you. It is unlikely that reconciliation is a viable option. Alice will likely pursue her personal belongings and pension. He considered for a moment before answering. On the one hand, he could take a principled stand, expose the full extent of the situation, and let the consequences unfold. However, he could simply depart. Art had just provided him with 5 million reasons to do so. Does CRAR have medical personnel on hand? Tom inquired. Oh yes, Tom replied. I believe we have several doctors. That's good to know, Tom said. You might want to load a few into the limousine and send them here for your team. That way, we can all agree. I think that's a good idea, Tom said. Let's do it. Precisely, Art concurred. Are we done, Tom? Goodbye, Art, Tom replied, concluding the conversation. Tom then removed his phone, disabled the recording app, and returned it to his pocket. I knew you would understand, Tom said. It's our way. We can still be friends, friends with benefits, when this is all over. She imagined this as a possibility. Her most winning smile, yet even her perky smile could not cancel the effect of the destroyed nose. Her eyes turned black, and blood caked under her nose and dripped in drops onto her chin. Tom found the sight comical and allowed himself to smile. SM once again. Alice misinterpreted his smile as agreement and leaned in. In order to kiss him, Tom extended his right hand to stop her. He then grabbed her face with his hand and pushed her back until she fell with a crash onto the sofa. Either I hit you too hard or not hard enough. In what world would I want to kiss you? I will be here tomorrow, Tom stated and proceeded to exit the premises. He paused at the entrance to interact with Bill. Do your legs still hurt? He inquired. Yes, Bill responded, his tone indicating frustration. Perhaps this will distract you, Tom suggested, and proceeded to kick Bill in the groin. Bill's body arched involuntarily, and he emitted a groan. He then entered his vehicle, uncertain of his destination but aware of the need for sustenance and shelter. The necessity for such a high position on the hierarchy of needs was evident. He procured a hamburger from one of the local cafes and proceeded to check into the Red Roof Inn, situated just outside the city limits and in close proximity to the highway. Despite the aches and pains that had accumulated over the course of the day, he was able to fall asleep almost immediately upon retiring to bed. The physical discomfort he was experiencing was evident in his demeanor as he woke up early in the morning and struggled to get out of bed. He was preparing coffee in his motel room when his phone beeped, prompting him to reach for it. It was a message from the other party, which he opened immediately. The message expressed regret for the previous day's events and extended an invitation to meet at a shopping center around noon. Take a seat at the bar. I will be there. He replied with a message and poured lukewarm brown water from the coffee maker carafe into a paper cup. Yes, I'll be there, he thought and set up his laptop. It was time to start online banking in college, long before meeting Alice. Tom had an economics professor who recommended having at least one offer was made to open an account with Shore as a rainy day fund. He had nothing to lose, and with the assistance of the professor, he soon became the owner of a brand new bank account in the Cayman Islands. This was in relation to his Love You Foundation, which he had opened 10 years previously and to which he made contributions whenever possible. He was proud that he had approximately $50 in the account. The balance in his account was approximately $50,000. The transfer of funds from Kara's account to his personal account on the original account was completed with the use of a password and a few keystrokes on the secure website of the bank. The remaining $100 was left in Kara's account. Tom transferred the remaining $50,000 into his personal account on the original bank website. He then proceeded to change his clothes and prepare to meet the author of the message. Upon arriving at the appointed time, Tom observed a man of approximately Tom's age. The man was well-dressed and possessed a certain degree of physical attractiveness. Dressed, Tom approached him. I believe you sent me a message, he said, sitting down. I'm sorry that everything turned out this way. I'm unsure if there was a clean way to tell you. The stranger began, why don't you start with who you are and how you are related to Alice? Tom replied, I was on the team. I left the army after 8 years of service. I was wounded in battle, had a long recovery, and was demobilized for medical reasons. I joined Carica about 6 months ago. I was assigned to Pete's team about 3 months ago. I was telling a friend about work and mentioned that He informed me that he worked for Alice. Upon inquiring about her full name, we discovered that we had a mutual acquaintance. He requested my assistance in caring for Alice, initially offering no explanation as to why. I was greeted warmly by the team. The reason for his request remained unclear until approximately 2 months later, when Alice approached me. She was very attractive and persuasive, but when I inquired about the ring, she merely smiled and stated that it was acceptable. I expressed my disagreement, and this marked the beginning of a significant decline in our relationship. After I rejected her advances, I was assigned the most challenging tasks and experienced considerable distress due to my interactions with Pete. I contacted our mutual acquaintance to inform him that Alice had approached me. He surmised that there was more to the situation than Alice was disclosing and suggested that you be made aware of the circumstances. Pete sent me a photograph of them attempting to persuade me to join the team, offering a reward if I accepted. I must say that I am not in agreement with their methods. Their modus operandi is to present themselves as straightforward and honest, yet I believe they are anything but. I resigned from my position yesterday and sent you a message. Our mutual acquaintance inquired of Tom Troy Baker whether I had met Troy. Troy replied, then paused for a moment before continuing. In essence, he assisted me in extricating myself from a challenging situation when I was a junior officer. I am indebted to him. A couple of favors we both should have done. Tom agreed. What are you going to do? One might be forgiven for assuming that I am betraying my former colleagues. In part, this may be the case, but it is also true that they have stolen the only irreplaceable thing I had. If I am unable to legally force them to pay, at least I can make them do so. While this will not bring Alice back, I believe that I may have underestimated her importance to me. A trip was planned. Tell Troy thank you for everything. I will not return to work, and you, Tom, finally asked. Well, Troy always spoke highly of Baxter Incorporated. Now that you are gone, they might need another engineer. I believe you will find that they do things a little differently at Baxter. You might prefer it. The work is challenging, but the added benefits do not compare to what Tony's team was offering. Tom smiled. I think I can live with this. He proceeded to check in for a flight to Costa Rica, Tamarindo, with the intention of relaxing. He then proceeded towards the security area and observed a mailbox ahead. He reached into his pocket and retrieved an envelope addressed to the U.S. Department of Justice, Washington, D.C. The envelope contained a flash drive with a recording. He considered the possibility that the Department of Justice might be interested in the contents. He then deposited the envelope into the mailbox and proceeded to the security line. 9 months later, Volume was seated at his usual table in a cafe. Anna, who was as lovely as always, brought him his café con leche. He expressed his gratitude and proceeded to raise the bottle to his lips. He had recently received a communication, which he was still holding in his hands. The envelope lacked a return address, prompting him to consider who had discovered him. He was not inclined to take any significant measures to evade detection. However, locating him in a small town on the Pacific coast of northern Costa Rica might necessitate resources that were beyond the reach of the average individual. His initial assumption was that artists had discovered him. He had left the item at his residence for 2 days. He was confident that it was not a bomb, but he was reluctant to take any chances. Carlos Tom turned to the proprietor. Does the cafe possess knives? Mr. Tom inquired. He then handed over the envelope and took a few steps back. It is always prudent to be cautious, he thought to himself as Carlos opened the envelope and handed it to him. Mr. Tom thanked him and took another sip from his bottle of beer. He then turned the envelope over, revealing several sheets of paper that fell onto the table. He picked up the note and read, "You might be interested." That was all that was written. The note indicated a telephone number in lieu of a signature. Troy reasoned that he could easily ascertain the identity of the author by contacting the number. He proceeded to turn over another sheet of paper, which proved to be a copy of an article from a newspaper with a photograph. The photo showed Pete, Bill, Alice, and Betty being led out of the Kariki building in handcuffs. The title of the article read, "For accused of multi-million-dollar procurement fraud." He smiled. Perhaps the lawyers at Arts were not as formidable as he had imagined. He had developed this habit since his Spanish was weak and his English was not widely spoken. He enjoyed hearing English spoken, even if it was just to himself. Anna, another beer, please. He held out his empty bottle. Mr. Tom, he said, accepting the beer. Thank you. Anna, he said, accepting the beer, taking a sip, and looking out at the deep blue Pacific Ocean. Subscribe to our channel so that your second-in-command does not deceive you, and proceed with the next story, which is more compelling than this one. If you are under 18, abstain from listening to the next story.